We've seen some interesting numbers coming through from the World Bank. And when you strip out South Africa, sub-Saharan Africa as a whole expanded by 5.8% in 2010. It's expected to grow around 6.4% this year. And, good prospects for the continent as a whole, but not nearly as high as what we've seen in the likes of Asia.
Indeed, Eleni. However, these high growth rates in the past would have not been imaginable if you look a decade ago. So having Africa grow now steadily and continuously in the range of 5 and 6% is already quite remarkable. However, as you said, Asia is still on average at 8%. But let me make a bet. One time in this decade, in one specific year, African growth rates on average would be higher than average growth rates in Asia.
Okay, so what kind of numbers are we looking at here? Because when you look at Asian growth rates, we're sitting so very close to around 10% growth. We know what China's growth is looking like, although the World Bank has in fact downgraded China's growth prospects from 10% to just over 8% or so. So clearly things are starting to rebalance.
Yeah, China has been growing at these remarkable high growth rates for a long time now, but it is unlikely that for a whole decade you can keep growing at that level of income now at 10%. And so if you take South Asia as well, you have growth rates more of 8%, and then putting that broadly together, you get these 8 to 9% that people are working on. But over the long term, when countries grow richer, and you see this also in the Western world, you will not be able to grow at this high levels, and some of where the growth is coming from, especially manufacturing, would move to other parts. And where could it move in the world? It's only Africa left.
Okay, very exciting stuff. Let's get into some of the trends that you, Wolfgang, have highlighted for the rest of the continent going forward. Mobile revolution, it's all about technology. We are starting to see those people without access to communications starting to use mobile phones. Of course, it seems that this is the last frontier when it comes to mobile penetration, and we're starting to see a lot of headway being made in the likes of Nigeria and Kenya as well.
Yes, a decade ago, cell phone penetration in Africa was close to 0. Now 3 in 4 Africans own a cell phone. Also a decade ago, cell phones were used to communicate and to speak with your friends and your family. Today it's a development tool for so many applications, and in Kenya you have remarkable innovations, especially around mobile money. So what I predict is that by the end of this decade, close to 90 or more % of Africans will have phones and have affordable phones at affordable rates with very new development tools you couldn't imagine today. But the mobile money revolution, to use that example, which 3 in 4 Kenyans are using, 15 million Kenyans, will spread to the continent and to other parts of the world.
And can we comfortably say, with a lot of growth prospects in this particular sector, that we could see some more interest coming through from international companies heading into the African continent when it comes to that ICT space?
Telecoms has already been one of the leading sectors to receive foreign direct investment, and that is likely to continue. However, just to rephrase what you said earlier, Africa is in that sense not the last frontier anymore, because the cell phone revolution already happened. It's just to reach that next level, the next stage. And what is also important to note is that we talk a lot about the new economy, and there was a remarkable aspect of that new economy in Africa over the last decade. But what we predict will happen now is that new economy would actually infiltrate the traditional old economy, so that you get efficiency gains in manufacturing and agriculture and many other service sectors through mobile technology. And that's where you will likely see more investment coming in as well.
We're seeing rapid urbanization, and a lot of the cities in Africa are bursting at the seams. Infrastructure is just not happening quickly enough. Clearly, infrastructure is also going to be one of the things that will ensure that the African continent steams ahead from a growth perspective.
Yeah, infrastructure indeed is one of the main bottlenecks. If you think of clear, tangible, physical bottlenecks, it is infrastructure. It's energy, the roads, and the water supplies. And but what is interesting about urbanization is that you have had that trend, almost a silent one, that has also reshaped Africa now. A decade ago, Africa was still predominantly a rural continent. Now you're in the range for most countries of 40% urban population, which keeps on rising quite rapidly. The most rapidly urbanizing continent in the world is Africa. That creates many challenges, and you hinted to them, but a lot of opportunities, because you have then what we economists call economies of scale, and they make companies viable that would have not been viable before.
Touching on regional integration, and we've already seen this happen with the East African community. Do you think that we'll be seeing more integration going forward?
Yeah, as you know, these integration processes have a highly political element as well, so you never know what will happen on the political front. But so far, if you again look back at the last year's guidance, you have the stars well aligned to move towards further integration. And often that's also important to highlight. You need key action and targets, and they need to be implemented, and that's the challenge. But these action and targets already create a frame of environment and reference where then companies move in. And so what is more important than the public pronouncements, which are important, is the actual action on the ground. And you see companies, in the case of East Africa, Kenyan companies now moving quite actively into Rwanda, into Uganda, into Tanzania, and vice versa. And that's a new dynamic that we have not seen before.
It's interesting. We're also seeing the dynamic play with the BRIC countries between Africa and, of course, the BRIC nations. Do you think there's also going to be a big focus, perhaps moving trade away from the developed nations, perhaps from the north, the likes of Europe and the US, and focusing more on those developing nations?
Absolutely, and as you mentioned before, with that high growth in Asia, which is not just very good for the world economy, which has helped the world economy to weather that storm much better than expected, it also helps Africa a lot, because these trade relations are just accelerating at an unseen pace. And so a lot of the trade increases that Africa is seeing is indeed with these BRIC countries and with other developing countries. And so that has been a new big growth frontier, and there are many predictions, not just from my institutions, which see growth between Africa and BRIC countries rise rapidly over the next 5 to 10 years.
It seems very rosy, the picture that we're painting here, and all the opportunities that are around us when it comes to Africa, but there are going to be countries that perhaps will fall behind. Give us some of the challenges that some countries, of course, Africa, 53 countries on the continent, so one cannot expect every country to grow exponentially, as we've just pointed out, but looking at the challenges and who you think will lag.
No, this is a very important point, and one shouldn't be overly optimistic, because there's, first of all, still so many challenges and risks that Africa is facing, including food crisis and droughts that are more on the natural causes of challenges. But you have all the political volatility, and if you would look at global headlines, most people would not fully believe the story I was telling, because the story of Cote d'Ivoire and other difficult countries is still overshadowing the good news that is more continuous on the ground. And so what you have seen and will continue to see is a drifting apart. Some of the high performers of the last decade have actually been catching up even with the richer countries in terms of some social indicators, in terms of enrollment rates in schools, but also in terms of life expectancy. You have seen jumps there, which are now closing in to the richer parts of the world, but some have just not moved at all. So the Congos of this world, some of the very fragile West African countries, and even the semi-stable countries in East Africa that have seen lots of volatility